Hey there, welcome into Unpaid Interns. I'm Griffin Epstein on this Wednesday afternoon, January 13th, and we are one day away from a big matchup for Indiana basketball as they take on their rival Purdue. And we have a great guest to talk all about it and all about what's been a very interesting Indiana basketball season so far. Dustin Dopirak of the Daily Hoosier joins us today, also formerly of The Athletic, covered IU athletics for many years in Bloomington as well for that. Dustin, great having you on today.
Thanks so much for having me, Griffin. Appreciate it, man.
And Dustin, it's been similar, I think, the last couple seasons under the Archie Miller era. It's hard to kind of figure out where this team is, how good they are. They don't really have any bad losses. Maybe Northwestern you would consider a bad loss, but certainly nothing outside of that. But they also haven't beaten a top 25 team this season. I mean, where are we on how good this IU basketball team really is?
I mean, I think it just comes back to the idea that they're just okay. And there's a reason why that is. I mean, they have enough talent to beat teams that they're better than, and they're not beating a lot of teams that they're not better than. I mean, it's just it's odd, I think, for Indiana because for a while, I mean, everything was always so dramatic. I mean, when you look back at the sort of buildup to the 2012-13 team and everything around that stretch. When they were bad, it was for this big dramatic reason, in the previous years because of, the Sampson era and all the sanctions and really literally building up from the bottom and coming back. And you're always asking, okay, where are they in this rebuilding process? With this, it's been different. It's just they've never been at rock bottom. And in some ways that's not allowed for like sort of a full scale cleaning start over reset period. And they keep putting together these teams that are just okay. They're flawed. They have couple good players. They don't have anybody that's completely dead weight, but they also don't have, they have a superstar, but maybe they don't have great 2 or 3 player core after that. There's obviously some nice bit players on this team. I think Aldorm's playing pretty well. Rob Finney's had a good couple of games, but I mean, Armand Franklin was really becoming that sort of second star that I think they really needed. I don't think you always need sort of a Robin to go with the Batman, but I think this group really did because I think you need a guard that you can lean on and say, all right, go get me 20 at some point in time when you could just say, okay, like I'm trusting that my guy is going to beat your guy. He's got enough moves, enough different ways to score the basketball. He can do enough things that like I'm going to just trust that my guard's going to win against your guard in this position. And I don't think with Franklin out right now with his ankle injury, don't know if he's going to be a game time decision tomorrow night. Everything else, you're not necessarily winning those matchups. You don't feel like, again, Aldorm can get you points. He can do a lot of good things. He's a useful basketball player. Finney's the same way. But are you overwhelming anybody's backcourt with what you have? I don't think you are. I think you've got other players that contribute, that help. But again, aren't overwhelming anybody. I think you got to be happy with what you've seen from Trey Galloway as a freshman. Race Thompson does a really good job of just doing kind of what you call, I think, in a complimentary way, all the garbage stuff. Gets easy buckets in one-on-one matchups. Goes and gets offensive rebounds, plays hard, defends hard. Really, really useful guy. Is he a dominant player? Is he a star? Is he a guy that you put in an All Big Ten conversation? I don't think so. I mean, right now they have 1.5 All Big Ten players. I think Franklin will be in that discussion if he gets to play a full season and keeps progressing the way that he was. But that's it, and that's I think the big thing is that it's just still a team that you don't look at them the same way that you look at an Illinois or an Iowa or even a Minnesota right now. Certainly not a Michigan, the way Michigan is playing, or even Wisconsin. Again, they battled with Wisconsin, and that I think is a really good sign. Took that game to double overtime, had chances to win it. That's a good sign for where they're progressing. But they ultimately don't get that win because they don't have some things that Wisconsin has. I mean, they have. Wisconsin has a couple, good big guys, certainly in Micah Potter being one of them, but they have a Demetric Trice who you can just say, we're down 2, find a way to get me a bucket. You're getting the ball, make it happen. And he did it twice to force double overtime. So there's just some pieces that this team just does not have yet. And, again, they're probably going to, there's a good chance they lose the All-American player that they're going to have at the end of this year. Trace Jackson Davis, I would presume, will probably move on if he thinks he's going to get drafted, and I think he will. So then it's just, well, what's the next step from there? What do they look like after that? And so it's not this sort of straight up trajectory in terms of building. They're just keep turning out teams that are just okay, and they'll probably be an NCAA tournament team as they would have been last year had there been a tournament. But I don't know that I see this team certainly being in a top 5, top 6 position in this league.
I don't want to get to too many big picture questions right away, but you kind of brought it up and said, this team is just okay. I guess in the fourth year of Archie Miller, obviously there's a lot of expectations among Indiana basketball fans. Is it okay that this team right now is just kind of a mid-level, Big Ten level basketball team that, sneaks into the NCAA tournament?
I mean, big picture, no. At the end of the day, I mean, and that doesn't mean I don't think Archie Miller's seat is warm or anything like that. I think he's safe. I think ultimately he'll be viewed as having gone to the tournament last year because he was close enough that I think had we got to Selection Sunday before the pandemic hit, I think they would have got in, and I think he'll be judged that way. And again, I think this team will probably get in too at the end of the day, probably, and presuming, of course, we make it. They managed to keep things together, and it does seem like they're going to push forward no matter what through the pandemic, through COVID-19. Is it still going on and obviously getting worse? But I think this group I think that will make him sort of safe for a little while going forward. But I think there will be a reckoning, especially he gets towards the latter years in his contract, when you have to start making decisions as to whether or not you're going to give him an extension. Or whether you're going to go in another direction. Right now, I don't think they have to make that decision. Ultimately, I think the financial situation facing everybody at this time means that I just don't see, especially this athletic department that I think knows where it stands, understands that it is not the richest athletic department in the Big Ten at all. It is not in a position to be throwing money away and paying people not to come to work. So I don't see them paying out a buyout really of any sort the way things are working. So I don't see, even if things go a little bit haywire right now, that I don't see them making a decision soon. And I would be even surprised if they did it in a year. But he's got to show something. It's got to show a direction that things are getting markedly better to the point that, does he have to show that he's on a national championship trajectory in the next couple of years, that you can circle a team that you say this team should compete to win the whole thing? I don't think he needs to do that, but I mean, I think you at least need to start churning out teams that are Sweet 16 quality, that are Big Ten contender, Big Ten championship contender quality. Again, this is a really good league right now. I don't think you should be held to the standard of having to win the league, but you do have to, ultimately, if you're coaching in Indiana, you are held to a high bar. And I don't think it looks good, certainly for him, that for everything you want to say about Tom Crean, ultimately he did have a Sweet 16 team, and he started off in a much worse place. Again, there is something to be said for the fact when you get rid of everybody and start from scratch, there's some ways in which you can get it together faster because you're not carrying on the last guy's recruits, and you don't have these sort of funkily built classes. You can sort of build this core and say, okay, you guys are going to take your lumps and then you're going to grow up. And that's what, Indiana did, is take guys like Jordan Holes and Christian Watford and bring them all together. And they just suffered for 2 years. And then they got, Oladipo made his leap, and you bring Cody Zeller in and you have a better team. And it's sort of more drastic that way. Whereas it's just been sort of, lose one guy here, put it back together. They haven't really got a core that they've sort of really grown around. So it hasn't faced the same trajectory. And I don't think you can judge Archie Miller the same way. But all the same, I mean, fans are certainly starting to notice that, hey, we got rid of the last guy who was in a Sweet 16 in 4 years. And in his fifth year, built a team that, even though it only got to Sweet 16, was good enough that it could have won the national championship given some better circumstances. I thought that team ran out of gas at the end, but it was the number one team in the country for a while. And so it's like, okay, if Tom Crean can build a national championship caliber team, even if they didn't win it in 5 years, why does it not seem like Indiana's anywhere near that in 4 years of Archie Miller? And that's certainly going to be part of it's part of the calculus. So I think that gets him run out of town. No, and I do think everybody, especially within the administration, notices that it's a different trajectory. It's a different ballgame. It's been a different path in rebuild, but still, that question ends up being part of the calculus going forward. Does this guy shown you that he's going to take it to that level, and isn't ultimately that level the one that you want to get at and stay at and believe you deserve to be as the Indiana basketball program?
Well, let's get a little bit more into the season and the region. And you mentioned the Wisconsin game earlier. I mean, a close loss for Indiana, but played very well on the road. They haven't won in over 20 years. And then Nebraska, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, and nearly lose that game. playing down right now?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far. Again, I just don't think they're that great that they can overwhelm anybody. I mean, I didn't see. I mean, they went through stretches where they couldn't make a shot, but that's not playing down or anything at all, because they go through stretches like that. That it's not like, oh well, you never see Indiana do that, they must be taking it easy. No, Indiana tends to go through stretches where they can't make shots, and Nebraska obviously decided what they were going to do is they were going to sell out their entire defense to taking the ball out of Trace Jackson Davis's hands and say, somebody else go beat us. We know how good this guy is. We know if we give this guy an inch, he's going to dominate us. And so we're just going to put a bunch of bodies on him and take him away that way. And we're going to say, you know what? Al Durham, Rob Finney, come get it. We're going to give you some shots. You take them. We trust you're only going to make so many. And for a while that was backfiring, and they were hitting some shots, and eventually those stopped going in. And same for all of them. I think they were 2 of 10 for 3 in the second half. And you say, hey, you know what? That's kind of who this team is. It's not playing down a level. They were playing up a level in the first half, and water found its level as far as their ability to shoot. And again, they're going to have to figure out how to be better at that, because, again, if you're an opponent, you look around and say, okay, who am I afraid of? And the answer is Trace Jackson Davis and not really anybody else. And again, can those guys make shots? Yes, they can. Can you get burned? If all of them come together and are effective in a given day, you can. But again, Nebraska was taking that chance that they wouldn't, and they ended up kind of being right. To an extent, it ended up being, to some extent, a wide decision. Looked really bad in the first half, looked a lot better in the second half. And Trace obviously ended up getting his buckets, and they got some by just sheer will and determination. But it is kind of, what's game plan, everything coming together when Trace Jackson Davis has the ability is not, when a team doesn't decide that it's only going to try to take him away, then he can be really good. And he played phenomenally well against Wisconsin, and he eventually got his against Nebraska. But he did, I think, what was smart, considering the way Nebraska was double teaming everything he was doing. I mean, you don't have to try to, take on 2 guys all the time. He was moving the ball around. For a while it was working, then for a while it wasn't. So I think that's more, I think it was just a function of, differentiation and game plans there. And for all I'm talking down on them, I mean, they are capable of competing with just about everybody. One, because they do have a great big, and the rest of the guys are decent. They just don't have, with Franklin out, they just don't have a second guy they can really rely on, and they're not going to overwhelm anybody towards the top of the league. I thought that, again, it was a really good game. I think there is good news to be seen, I guess, when it comes to some of the real supporting cast guys, the guys coming off the bench. I mean, Anthony Leo had a really good game against Wisconsin, hit a big shot against Nebraska. I think working him into the rotation, him being a part of it, I think is a good sign, something they've got to be excited about in terms of the way he's progressing and what he's contributing. But this is kind of how it's going to be. They're just even the teams that you would consider to be at the lower levels of the league, they're not going to go out and beat by 20. They're not that much better than the worst teams in the Big Ten, that they're just going to crush those teams. But because they have a great player in the middle, and they have some experience, and for some given periods, sometimes every once in a while they can shoot the ball and they can defend. They do really, really care about defense, and that's obviously what keeps them in the game. Is they're going to, when they're good on defense, they can win some basketball games. So it's just how it's going to be. I think it is every game for Indiana in the Big Ten is going to be close. They don't have the firepower like an Iowa or an Illinois even, that they're going to run teams off the floor, but they're good enough defensively to keep themselves in just about every game.
You mentioned the defense. It's been really elite at times. We've seen struggle with I think top 15 still in the country. You think for Indiana elite level?
It's stopping the ball. It's good perimeter defense. I mean, I think they're between Thompson and Jackson Davis. They've become really, really good at protecting the rim. I mean, I think he really, like, Thompson really stands out a lot. I think his level of athleticism has really skyrocketed the last couple of years. As he's gotten really healthy this season. I don't know what his block number is, but it's high. And, he's not a super long guy, and, he's not a super tall guy. So him getting into that conversation and getting in that spot it just tells you a lot about the physical work he put into making his body more explosive. So that makes a big difference. So having those two guys around to defend the rim is a big deal. And Thompson, you can trust him also to, get out there and defend a 4 on the perimeter. That's big. I mean, both of those guys have been able to do that reasonably well. Certainly the way the game has evolved is, more 4s and 5s are taking you out on the perimeter and forcing you to defend them out there. And they've been better at that. I mean, are they lockdown guys out there? No, but they're good enough. And I think that makes a huge difference. So those guys really give them a backbone. And I think the difference is when they defend well on the perimeter, they're really good, and they have guys that care. Certainly Finney, I think, has always been a really good on-ball defender. Al really cares. He's a pretty good on-ball defender. Isn't an overwhelming guy physically, but does have some length so he can defend multiple positions. I think Trey Galloway, obviously, as a freshman, comes in and really cares about defense. And Armaan Franklin, again, when he was healthy, has made almost as big of a leap on the defensive end as he had on the offensive end. I mean, they put him on IO in the Illinois game, and he's starting to be the guy that gets that big 6'4" wing that can shoot, that can score at all 3 levels. You put Armaan Franklin on that guy, and he's doing pretty well, causing turnovers, got some length, gets his hands in his passing lanes, can take the ball off some people. When you've got all those guys together playing really well on the perimeter, whoever happens to be in, obviously I just mentioned 4 perimeter guys, but point being, and you can, move those guys in and out. That makes for a really good defensive team, and they're good at when they're good at keeping the ball out of the paint. They've had some issues, I think, in some recent games, had some periods where they did have some breakdowns, didn't defend the ball as well, didn't defend the ball great against Nebraska, didn't defend transition great against Nebraska, had maybe some issues there against in previous games as well. I think the Penn State game was an issue. They were able to get broken down a lot. Sam Sessoms in particular, the Penn State guard, was really able to get to the rim a lot. So they've had to change focus on that. I think it was a wise move on Archie Miller's part to start really saying, hey, I've got to extend the bench. I've got to dig into that more, get more minutes from those guys. Even if they are freshmen and even you don't know that you can trust them yet, you got to give them some minutes because you are wearing down the veterans. Those guys are out there for too many minutes, and eventually that's going to wear on your legs, and that's when you lose those battles out on the perimeter. When guys are able to break you down is when you don't have your sort of base underneath you. So I think that was a wise move, and I think that has helped certainly in the last couple of games. Maryland was one of them. I think they were better. Wisconsin, they were better, and have come up with big stops and big periods. I think that's a big issue, but just being able to defend the ball, being where you're supposed to be on ball screens, but they've got a good back end. And even for guys that are playing a ton of minutes in Thompson and Jackson Davis without Brunk, that's been an issue, is they don't have anybody else other than those two who can play the 5. And some guys have stepped up. But Jerome Hunter hasn't been bad. I mean, he's had some moments defensively. He's still not I don't even know if you'd even say adequate defender. I guess he's getting close to adequate. Is you're not as terrified putting him out there as maybe you were in certain circumstances. He's getting better at keeping the ball in front of him on the wing. Still gets out of position sometimes. Obviously had those 3-shot fouls, I think, against Maryland, where he ran into a couple of those and is not always where he needs to be on closeouts, but I think he's getting better also. So just as a group, when they can defend the ball well, they're in good shape because they have some good rim protection back there.
You mentioned a lot of starters for Indiana have played a lot of minutes so far this year. None more than Trace Jackson Davis. They actually mentioned, I think, on the Indiana presser earlier today, he's played the most minutes of anybody in the entire Big Ten so far this season. How much of a concern is that for Indiana, potentially of them wearing down? IU still has 14 more Big Ten games to go, and almost none of them are easy.
Yeah, no, it is an issue. I think, again, you don't have too many other people. You don't really have options there. I mean, you can put Race Thompson at the 5, and he can give him a break. But that's it. And you also need, Race to play the 4, and you want to have those guys on the floor together when you can. So it is an issue, and that does mean they're going to need more minutes from Jerome Hunter and from Jordan Geronimo to play the 4, to create more situations where you can just have Thompson at the 4, or you can just have, where Jackson Davis and Thompson are not necessarily on the floor together. I mean, they are good together. So it's certainly tempting to keep them on the floor together at the same time as much as you can, but they have to find some minutes for those guys to get a rest and not wear them down. But again, Jackson Davis is their best player by a long shot. So you lose something significant when he's not out there, but you got to find maybe 10 minutes a game that you can trust Thompson at the 5 and you can trust either Hunter or Geronimo at the 4 to keep you out there, basically just again, so you don't wear him down. He doesn't seem to be wearing down. He seems to be in really good shape. I mean, I think you really have seen him make the leap that you were supposed to see him make. He's made the improvements, the adjustments that you would hope to see from a freshman to a sophomore. I think he's become a good player, a better player in all the right ways. And part of that is just being physically ready for the pounding, being physically ready to take on double teams. He obviously put the work in the offseason to be that type of guy. I don't see somebody who's worn down necessarily at this point, but it's middle of January. We still got another, month and a half of just grind before you're even getting, close to 2 months before you're even getting to, March Madness in the NCAA tournament. And so, and that's going to be a lot. This is when the games start to get fast and furious. You're starting to see, it's becoming 2-game weeks. And I don't even know what all these kids are even dealing with on a grander level in terms of, COVID-19 protocol and, what is class even going to be like? I mean, right now, I don't think they're even back in school yet. I could be wrong about that. But there is going to be a toll, I think, taken on Trayce Jackson-Davis, and they do have to be cognizant of that.
Well, the Purdue game coming up tomorrow, let's talk a little bit more about it. And I think the thing that stands out for many Indiana fans is Archie Miller 0-6 against Purdue in his first 3 seasons. Why has Archie Miller just struggled so much against Purdue and Matt Painter so far in his tenure in Bloomington?
Well, because Purdue's had a better team. Mostly. I mean, last year was a little bit different, but I mean, obviously the 2 years before in Archie Miller's first 2 seasons, Purdue had Sweet 16 teams and an Elite 8 team and, had a bunch of pros, basically, certainly in Carson Edwards being a guy who was, he's a bench guy with the Celtics, but as a college player, he's been as fun to watch, as good of a guard as the Big Ten's produced in the last 4 or 5 years. And just difficult to defend. So it starts there just with the level of talent that Purdue has had. And then last season, I think they had a chance to get him and still didn't. And Purdue still had some good pieces that were sort of left over from the Elite 8 team, but they lost their best guys. They lost not only Edwards, but Ryan Klein from that group and still managed to pull out a couple wins. They played much better against Indiana than they played against a lot of teams. So there's an issue there. How much of it is coaching? I'm not sure. Matt Painter's a terrific basketball coach. Terrific. I mean, he is, I think, he's one of the best coaches in the country. Now, how long is that list? Where do you put Painter on your national list? I mean, I think he's top 20 minimum. I think that's safe to say that he belongs in that discussion in terms of building a program overall and just being a smart guy in terms of putting together a winning program and also just a winning game plan. They got smart guys over there and they've got a lot of pieces. So more, in most of those cases, he's had the guys. He's had the dudes on his side, and that's we win basketball games when you have the better players. So this year, I do think Purdue has more overall talent. They're younger, and they're developing, but I think this group, this core, is going to be really good in a year. They're going to have. I presume they'll have another year of Travion Williams because just the body he's got is not necessarily the most NBA desirable at this point of being 6'9", and I think he's probably still 260, something like that. Obviously, it's a more fast-paced game, and the wide-bodied center is not as, again, desirable in the NBA as it has been maybe at some other times in its history, but he can still dominate you on the low block at this stage. He's extremely skilled, again, really good at from 5 to 10 feet out. Really good post moves, also a terrific passer out of a double team, and phenomenal rebounder on both ends. So you start there, but their guards, they've got a lot of youth on the perimeter, but a lot of options. And so they're not going to be an easy team to defend. They got a lot of guys who can shoot the ball, some guys who can take you to the rim. They don't have a lead guard that's at that Carson Edwards level right now, but they have a few guys who are really developing into really good players. So it's not going to be an easy one. So, and that's just the biggest reason. Ultimately, Purdue has had more talent. And right now, it just seems like I watched that Purdue team, and I haven't had a chance to watch it as much as I did when I was covering them for The Athletic and watching them more closely. But I saw kind of, and sort of wrote about what those guys were supposed to be and what they were developing into. And they're on track. I mean, just sort of everybody from Brandon Newman to Mason Gillis to Ethan Morton to Jaden Ivey to Eric Hunter. Isaiah Thompson, Sasha Stefanovic, all of those guys are sort of developing into what you thought they would be, not necessarily beyond that level. And I don't know if you circle any one of those guys and say that is definitely going to be an All Big Ten player. But Sasha Stefanovic is shooting like 49% from three. Newman is showing that he's got that shooting range that you saw from him in Valparaiso High School. Thompson is shooting from three. Eric Hunter, I think, has made some leaps. Jaden Ivey is a really tough cover as a just sort of longer guard. Ethan Morton is just a super smart kid who came out of Butler High School in Pennsylvania, not far from where I grew up, and he's just extremely intelligent, high IQ, phenomenal passer, does a lot of little things well. Not even getting a ton of minutes, but he can still play the game, and there's just a lot of pieces there. I think work and are sort of in the mold of what Matt Painter wants from a program. So I mean, if Indiana's going to get him, they kind of got to get him now because they are young. And Indiana will still have the best player on the floor. I think Jackson Davis is a better player than Travion Williams, and you sort of hope that carries them. And I think Armand Franklin, if he plays, is still a better player than any of those guys individually. But Purdue's got more depth, more players that are operating at a higher level. And in a year, they're going to be even better because you tack on all of those, and then you add a Caleb First and Trey Kaufman to the situation. So how being in more size and kind of versatile guys that can play that four. And again, also we haven't even talked about Zach Edey, the 7'4" giant that they've got out there, who I thought was just going to trip all over himself in this freshman year and has been adequate and makes buckets and rebounds. So they got a lot of good pieces that are just going to get better. So I mean, Archie Miller's got to get a win over Purdue soon, because I think it's going to be really tough to get one next year or the year after.
You mentioned Trace Jackson Davis and Travion Williams, obviously going to be an important matchup. We saw earlier when Jackson Davis faced Kofi Coburn of Illinois, they kind of neutralized each other a little bit defensively. Neither scored a lot in that game. What guard, especially if Armand Franklin doesn't play for Indiana, you feel needs, or anyone else outside, I guess I should say, if Jackson Davis needs to step up, especially offensively for Indiana, if they want to get some scoring against a very tough defensively Purdue team?
I do think Race Thompson has a chance to be key because he's going to have a size advantage at whoever they threw out at them. I mean, I think Aaron Wheeler hasn't been the player that I thought he was going to be, just because he was a really good shooter coming off the bench on that Elite Eight team, and he really hasn't rediscovered the stroke. But he's definitely physically stronger, and he's become just a tougher defender and tougher rebounder. So that is going to make an interesting matchup there, but I think Thompson can still out physical him there. And Mason Gillis just isn't that big. He's a big muscular guy. He plays bigger than he is. And I like watching him play. He hustles. He's a tough kid. He was a phenomenal rebounder in high school before he got hurt. He's missed a lot of time with injury. He missed almost all of he missed his whole senior year, and obviously decided to redshirt last year. He was still kind of getting back into it. So I mean, he's going to play Thompson tough, but Thompson's going to have some advantages. Maybe athletically, definitely height wise. And so I think Thompson has to be able to win that one-on-one. I think he has to be able to win that one-on-one matchup. I think he will get some one-on-one opportunities in that situation, because they are going to double track Jackson Davis a lot. They did last year. They will do that again. So I think he's got to take advantage of those double teams and get some buckets around the rim, that way taking on a smaller guy. And obviously the guards got to play well. And that's the case every single time. I mean, Durham and Finney, when Durham and Finney are productive, they are so much better. And again, like I don't think either one of those guys is an overwhelmingly good all Big Ten caliber guard that, you feel like, all right, mine against yours, mine's better. I don't know that Indiana feels that way, but if you get 12 to 15 from Al Durham, which happens sometimes, if you get 10 to 12 from Rob Finney, if those guys are getting you buckets, if they're hitting outside shots for you, puts them in a position to have a chance. And so they need that. If those guys aren't scoring, it's over. I mean, you almost don't even have to play the game. If they're not getting any buckets from Durham and Finney, you can call this one. I would be shocked if Thompson and Jackson Davis can carry them all the way, because Purdue makes it tough on you around the rim. They're going to make it tough on Jackson Davis. The opportunities are going to be there for Finney and Durham, and so they have to take them. They have to score. That's their only chance. I would say they absolutely have to get guard production. Now, again, if Franklin plays, it's a different story. Certainly, if Franklin plays and you can get 15, 20 out of him, that changes things. But if Franklin's out, and they focus on Jackson Davis the way I think they're going to, there will be opportunities for Durham and Finney, and they will absolutely have to take him to win the game.
Well, before I have you make a prediction, I mentioned earlier, it's been a long time since Indiana's beaten Purdue. Archie Miller hasn't beaten Purdue. What's just the importance for Archie Miller and this program's trajectory to win this game, and also for the season when IU's about to go into a stretch of playing, I think, about 6 of their next 7 games against top 25 teams?
Yeah, no, in both cases, I mean, they need to pile up some wins now when they're facing more middle of the pack teams, and they've obviously gotten a couple, but they need more. They need more to set themselves up for when it's going to get uglier towards the end of this, even towards the end of this month. I mean, I think it's Michigan State next, and then I think it's Iowa after that, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to get difficult really, really fast. And so you got to pile up victories against teams that you can beat, because, I mean, I'd be shocked if they could take down, Luka Garza. I'd be really surprised if they get Michigan State. They got Rutgers after that, then they got Michigan. I mean, the next 4, I didn't even look at that. I don't think it's really next 5. And you throw Illinois on that and Iowa again. I mean, it is brutal. I mean, I don't think I've even really looked at how bad it's going to be until just now. As I was talking to you, I just scrolled through it, and it's like, wow, where do they get another win after this? Where does it come, honestly, again? And the way Rutgers is playing, Michigan, all of a sudden we're talking about Michigan as a top 3 team. The way that they just shellacked Wisconsin last night. You're talking about Michigan in the Gonzaga and Baylor stratosphere right now. And so far, those 2 teams have been the only 2 teams in that stratosphere. Everybody, even the traditional blue bloods, the Kansases, the Kentuckys, the Dukes, have not been anywhere near that this year. It's just been really those 2 teams. And now you're talking Michigan being part of that. So the idea of them being able to go into Ann Arbor, Indiana being able to go to Ann Arbor and win sounds almost impossible right now. And again, Iowa is as good as advertised, better, actually. And they're still, I mean, I thought that team wouldn't be able to defend at all. And it's not defending great, but they're still getting enough points anyway to win games. So it's hard to imagine them beating those teams. Rutgers has played really, really well. Michigan State is still Michigan State. I mean, those guys have been inconsistent, but they still have dudes. So it's not going to be easy to win any of those games. So you got to grab one at least. And from a program standpoint, it does matter because, I think Matt Painter's star really rose after that Elite 8 when they really had, were what, a second, 2 seconds, whatever it was, 9 seconds. I can't remember how many seconds were on the clock from beating Virginia and going to the Final Four. And they would have beat the team that ended up winning the national championship. So again, it's possible, it's conceivable they were not far away from winning the whole thing in 2019. So again, that's really helped Matt Painter on the recruiting circuit. He's not a guy that goes after the 5-star guys necessarily. He doesn't view it as, he's not trying to beat the Kentuckys and the Dukes of the world, where Indiana every once in a while, sticks its nose in for one of those, for Romeo Langford or something like that. Purdue will just sort of back off and take its state and go after the guys that it wants, that it feels fit it well and will stay for that matter. But they already lost Trey Kaufman to Purdue. Purdue went and got Kaufman. That was a player Indiana wanted really bad. Indiana gets the flashier player out of what was the 21 class in Lander before he decided to reclass. But if Purdue keeps winning those matchups and gets a little bit more of a profile, and if this group a year from now is a Final Four team, is a Sweet 16 team, Final Four team again, and maybe gets close to a Final Four within a couple more years, you're going to have a hard time beating Purdue for great players. Again, Painter doesn't feel like he has to get Mr. Basketball, so it's not a requirement in the same way for the program as it is for Indiana, where that's sort of part of its mystique, is be able to get the best player in the state every year. Purdue will take the second and third best player in the state and pile those guys up and beat you. And so that's going to be harder to prevent them to do that the more and more they win. And again, it will be, part of that ultimately record that you look at when they are making decisions about whether Archie Miller gets a contract extension or whether they go another direction. That's going to be part of the discussion. So it is big for Indiana as a program, and it's just big for them as a team just to try to get a win before they go through this just brutal gauntlet they got coming up.
All right, Dustin. Well, we've heard all the analysis. Give us one key that between both teams that will decide who wins the game, and then give us a prediction of who you think is going to win tomorrow night at Assembly Hall.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana's just got to be able to defend the ball across the floor. They've got to be able to be good on closeouts. If they're going to double Travion, and I'm sure they will double Travion Williams to some extent, they have to be able to get out to shooters. They have to find a way. They've got to rotate in such a way that they're not getting crushed that way, because Travion Williams will find the guy. He will put it in his hands. And, they run the risk. All those guys can shoot. Just about everybody they're putting out there right now. They don't even have last year they had a Nojo Eastern that if he got the ball on the perimeter, you could trust that, he was going to have to drive the ball because he wasn't hitting from three-point land. They don't have anybody like that. Anybody they put out there right now can hit a 3-point shot and can stick it over top of you. So they've got to be able to do that. And they've got to be able to get buckets. They've got to be able to shoot the ball, and they've got to be able to, again, find a matchup and find somebody other than Trace Jackson Davis to beat Indiana, or to beat Purdue. So those are, I think, the keys for Indiana. And again, Purdue, on the flip side, does have to be able to take Trace Jackson Davis out of the game, and does have to be able to hit the shots when they get them. And they have been, for all the talk I've just said about how good they are, they have been inconsistent. And that's an issue that their coaching staff, I know, has. Feeling like there's some days where they don't get the best team, and that's what comes from having a really, really young team. They're going to grow up, but I mean, it reminds you a little bit of, when you saw the guys like Hulls and Watford in their freshman and sophomore seasons, where you had some moments where like, well, they're really getting it. And some moments where like they're getting, their doors blown off. So the Michigan State win tells you that they can be really good. They've got some other losses in there that tell you that they can fade and be nowhere near close to that. So Purdue just needs to be consistent, needs to hit the shots when they get them, take advantage when Williams is double teamed, and again, be effective against Jackson Davis. I don't want to say overcommit, but be able to take those guards out. And again, if Franklin plays, they've got to be able to stop him too. So in both cases, there's a lot of keys. Basically they're just supposed to do what's obvious. I think is the biggest thing, is just knowing what's out there and executing. And I'll get straight to it. I'm going to say Purdue wins it by 6 points. It's just how this rivalry has gone so far, and I just think they're a program in a little bit better shape than Indiana's in right now. I could find myself really wrong, but also it's at Indiana, but you don't get the normal home court advantage of being in Indiana. It's just going to be everybody's parents making noise as best they can, and that doesn't quite get it done.
No, it's certainly going to be a very different atmosphere at Assembly Hall tomorrow night for Indiana and Purdue, but it's going to be a fun game. And Dustin, great analysis on both the Indiana and Purdue side. Really looking forward to tomorrow night. And thanks so much for coming on today.
Absolutely, Griffin. Thanks so much for having me, man.
That will do it for today's episode of Unpaid Interns. Of course, if you missed any of this Unpaid Interns episode or any of our Unpaid Interns episodes over the last couple months, you can always check them out on the IU Sports Media YouTube page, Twitter page, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'll be back on Friday at noon. We are going to have some NFL playoff talk, a big weekend coming up in the NFL. So I hope you join us on our Twitter and YouTube pages live at noon on Friday. Until then, for Dustin Dopirak, I'm Griffin Epstein. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you again real soon.